All right, it's the All Access Entertainment Podcast, and we are back with a very special guest this week, legendary WWF photographer, Mr. Tom Buchanan. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This should be interesting.
My pleasure to have you here, and fans have been waiting to, fans enjoy your stories, whether it be social media or however it may be, and fans are definitely looking forward to a deep dive into your career and everything WWF, and beyond. So why don't we start, growing up as a kid, what were some of your hobbies and when did you first discover pro wrestling?
Primary hobby was probably photography, That's all I did from 7th grade on. I was a photographer, shooting for local newspapers, for the school yearbook, for whatever I could do. I was an outdoors kind of guy. I liked swimming, I like hiking and all that sort of stuff. Rode my bike all around town with the cameras, so everybody in this small little town knew me as the photographer. So that was my early thing. Went to school at the University of Buffalo, graduated in 1981, got a job at the Auburn Citizen, a small newspaper in upstate New York. Steve Taylor was the chief of photography there. We hit it off pretty well. The job was going well. He wound up shooting a series of pictures for a picture page on World Wrestling. Vince saw it. Vince McMahon saw it. He wanted to hire Steve, and he wanted to hire the writer too, a guy named Ed Holinsky. So Vince took both of those guys from the Auburn Citizen. I moved on to a different paper in Rome, New York, called the Rome Daily Sentinel. And then 2 years later, I was looking for a new job at the Utica Observer Dispatch and was hired over there. To get that job, I used Steve Taylor as a reference. And in exchange for the reference, he asked me to cover WrestleMania for him. So that was my very first contact with World Wrestling or wrestling of any kind. It was new. It was interesting. I didn't know what I was going to do. So Steve sent me up to Toronto a week prior just to cover a house show up there. So my first exposure with wrestling was a house show in Toronto. It was exciting as heck. I mean, full house and Maple Leaf Gardens, characters, action. It was a photographer's dream. Jack Tunney was the promoter up there, kind of took me under his wing, showed me the way. Then it was WrestleMania, and after that, I covered wrestling as a freelance photographer for Steve, so he needed more help. I continued to work during the day and weekdays as a photographer for a serious newspaper. Weekends, holidays, time off, travel for World Wrestling. That went along for about 2 years. In 1987, they hired me full-time as a staff photographer. Stayed on as a staff photographer until 2001 when I left, actually as chief of photography responsible for every image we produced in every application all over the world. Wow. So that's kind of the track that carried me through.
Sure. And that very first show, rewinding back a bit, Toronto, it's a house show leading up to WrestleMania 1, which was such a, monumental time for the World Wrestling Federation. Who were some of the first stars that you met at the show and you were kind of just, interacting with these guys right out of nowhere?
It was out of nowhere. I didn't know any of the stars that day. In fact, Steve had sent me up to Toronto. He had prepaid for an airplane ticket. So I get to the airport, there's a ticket there for me. I didn't really think that was going to happen. I was supposed to go to the Howard Johnson's hotel where I would be staying. And to get a ride to the arena, I was just supposed to ask any wrestler to get me a ride down to the arena. Now, I had never seen this. I had no idea who wrestlers were. So I was kind of bumping up to any big looking person and saying, "Hi, are you a wrestler? Can I get a ride to the venue?" Right. Yeah, that didn't go well. So I wound up, I don't even know who I talked to. Like, I didn't know any of these people. So I wound up getting a cab down to the venue, down to the Maple Leaf Gardens. Shot the event, explained my situation to Jack Tunney, who was the promoter, and he decided to just give me a ride back to the hotel at the end of the night. So whenever I did Toronto after that, I'd cab my way into the venue, and Jack Tunney would bring me back to the hotel.
And you say Jack kind of, was influential in the beginning there of, helping you get into the company, feel comfortable. Any personal memories of Jack? Any stories?
Um, no special stories. He was just a very nice, humble guy who enjoyed what he was doing and liked sharing it with me. I think the unique thing about him was his license plate. He had Continental, and his license plate was Ye Nut. Asked him, "What the hell?" It's Tunny backwards.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that was his character, right? He would put it out there for the world.
Easy enough. And
Mhm.
speaking of some greats, behind the scenes, Howard Finkel,
Oh
very
God.
influential in the company. What was your first interaction with Howard? When did you first meet him, if you remember? And some stories meeting him over the years.
I have no idea when I met him. Howard was just the company, always had been. I don't think there was ever any moment before World Wrestling existed without Howard.
Yeah.
He was always there. He was very focused on the fans and very focused on detail. So he knew everything about everybody. If you wanted to know when a match happened, he would be the guy that would take you there. Um, he was nerdy in a good kind of a way. In the early years, Vince was kind of, I don't know, he was gruff about a lot of people, and he fired people on the spot for no apparent reason. Like you wore the wrong color shirt and bang, you're fired. Howard Finkel was known to have been fired probably dozens of times, and he just wouldn't go. You're fired, get out of here. And then he'd be back the next day, and everything would have been forgiven. That was kind of the relationship that Howard had with Vince. Vince just needed him there. Years and years later, in 94, 95, I was developing a project with America Online before that ever became a thing. And Howard Finkel was probably the only person in the company that understood what that was because it was fan interaction. So Howard knew about it, he was watching it, and he was an advocate for my project of bringing AOL into World Wrestling. So that would be my sense of Howard Finkel.
Wow. So once you were, kind of beyond the freelance work and you were officially hired with the World Wrestling Federation, how many times were you on the road as a photographer?
Early on, all the time.
Okay.
I was hired as a ringside shooter, so that was supposed to be my job. So I was out for 3 weeks at a time, 4 weeks at a time, whatever it took. And then I'd come back to the office, process the film, set up another tour, and then get back out on the road. So my job was on the road. Over the years, I picked up more studio work, more overseeing of freelancers and other kinds of projects. So by the end, I was probably only shooting about 30% to 40% of my time. But at the beginning, it was 100%. When I started, I had a hot desk at 1055 Summer Street. So it wasn't even my own office or my own desk because I was out there on the road so much.
And you had different locations for the Titan Towers, of course, over the years. What are some of the different addresses or locations that come to memory?
So they started at Cape Cod, early 80s. By 84-ish, they were at 81 Holly Hill Avenue or 80 Holly Hill Lane in Greenwich, Connecticut. They only stayed there for a couple of years. When I was freelancing, that's where I was sending most of my film. About 86, they shifted over to 1055 Summer Street in Stamford, Connecticut. It was a bigger building, a nicer building, and they grew and grew within there. When I was hired in 87, they had outgrown 1055, so they were spreading across the street to 1100 Summer Street in Stamford. So my first desk was a hot desk at 1055. Within a few weeks, I was moved over to 1100. Soon after that, they opened a television building in Stamford at 120 Hamilton Avenue. So I was moved over there. And then in 91, they opened Titan Towers, combined the two Stamford locations, the office locations, and maintained the TV building as a separate entity.
And as far as travel and accommodation goes, did they cover your hotel, your flight, stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So everything was covered by the company for me. I was an employee. So every nickel I spent was covered by the company. That meant meals, it meant gratuities to get in and out of airports, it meant any ancillary expenses that might be needed. I had a free flowing expense account, so I could cover just about anything I needed.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah, it really was.
So
In
that's a
fact,
little different then from the talent then.
yeah, very, very different. So the talent were given airplane tickets, but they were on their own for all the other expenses. So they looked to kind of get together and share those expenses, hotel rooms, travel, all that kind of stuff. For me, it was all just go. And part of that was because I traveled so differently than they did. We were in those days, the 80s, we had 3 shows going all the time. So there would be 3 different tours, and talent would be together on a tour primarily. Occasionally they'd hop from tour to tour. But my gig meant I was going from tour to tour all the time. So it was not possible for me to hook up with anybody else.
Sure. And, speaking of traveling, you've traveled the world essentially. What are some of your favorite spots with the World Wrestling Federation that you were able to experience?
Geez, I like Canada always. So that's always up there. It's just a friendly country, and it's not as urban as the United States. In the United States, I really like California, the West Coast, LA, San Diego. Back in those days, Portland and Seattle, although they've both grown so much that I wouldn't want to be there right now. I looked for towns where the arena was easy for me to work in, where the airport was close, where the hotel was close, where there was something good to do nearby. So San Diego, for example, the hotel was right across from the arena, and there's a waterfront nearby, beaches and whatnot. So it was just a nice place to go. It was close to LA, so I could hop into San Diego, drive LA, drive to another town, San Bernardino, whatever, and put together a drive tour so it wasn't all airplanes. So I looked for things like that.
And did you normally have some time each trip to kind of enjoy the
Not much.
experience right into
Not
the
much.
show?
Right into the show. So my gig was usually to set up lighting in the arena for photography. So rather than using a flash on camera, we had really big strobe lights that went up on the catwalks. So my job was to carry those strobe lights from town to town. At about 4 o'clock, we'd start setting up on the catwalk. We'd shoot the show from 6 or 7 until whenever it ended, strip all that lighting gear down, get it back in the rental car, finishing up around midnight. Back to the hotel and then on to the next town. So there wasn't a lot of time. Sometimes I could build time in there, but for the most part, I was looking for things that I could do near the arena. So the beach near San Diego was a good option.
Sure.
LA had a IMAX theater right on the same property, so that was a good option. Orlando had a bowling alley down the road. So I'm not a big bowler, but you're in Orlando, throw some balls.
Something
So that's
to do.
what I was looking for. I'll go with Phoenix. Great hiking, there's a mountainous area, City Park. It was just a lot of fun to go hiking. So that's what I was looking for arenas and fun off the ring.
And when you're arriving at these airports, are you traveling solo to the shows, or you're carpooling with talent?
No, traveling solo. So I was carrying 8 to 12 cases of equipment. Those cases, they're giant anvil style cases, and they were actually cut to fit into a Ford Taurus. So they'd fill up the Ford Taurus. I had a certain way to put them in the trunk and then fill the back seat. So there really wasn't a lot of room for anybody else when I had all that gear.
And did you build up a list of favorite places to eat along the road? Like you're going to a certain city, oh, I can't wait to hit this spot. Right.
Omaha, Nebraska, the Smoke Pit. It was a barbecue joint. It was a dive, but they held it open for us after the show. So if they knew World Wrestling was in town, they'd hold the place open, and talent would be up there, and I went up there too. I liked it so much that after I left the company, I drove out to Omaha just for the Smoke Pit.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Now, how long did it take to start feeling comfortable with the talent? You're there for a couple months or a year. I mean, how long were you really felt comfortable with everybody?
Not at all during the freelance years. Right?
Okay.
Because there I was just parachuting in and out, just shoot the show and get out of there. I wasn't seeing them from night to night. There were a few instances there where I did feel good, where things happened where I felt like I could work with this guy again. But I don't think I really felt comfortable until I'd been on the road with them for probably a year or so.
A WWE Hall of Famer who was the cornerstone of the WWE, Mr. Gorilla Monsoon.
Sure.
Great. Any stories of Gorilla interactions over the years?
My first interaction with Gorilla was when I was a freelancer. We were doing a show, Saturday Night's Main Event. I think it was out in Phoenix, perhaps. Hulk Hogan had been injured, so he was being taken out in a stretcher. And I was, at that point, working as a news photographer during the day and was just doing this job on the side. So I had news photographer motif in me. As he's being pulled out on the stretcher, I'm doing my thing. And I get a little close, and Gorilla gives me a hard shove out of the way. Get out of the way. Rah! I was scared. I didn't know what I had done. Like, had I messed something up? Was this bad? So I had to check in with Steve and with Gorilla, and Gorilla said, that was absolutely perfect. You were just where I needed you to be. That's what we want, right? It's punctuation. It makes it look real. So just by being who I am, it made it real.
And how about small talk? But right before the photo shoot, you're setting up, you're ready to go. Is there any back and forth, or is it usually right to work, or how does that go?
So over the years, there was more of that as they got to know me. As an action shooter, when I was in the arenas, it was important for me to hit each locker room and hopefully see each guy before the show, just so they knew that a World Wrestling Federation photographer would be at ringside. It was important for our magazine that they be in full costume, properly shaved, looking good, right? If I shot pictures and they were out of character in some way or not looking like they cared, Linda McMahon would see that and she would be really upset. So there were a couple of hot points like that where talent got in trouble and it was nobody's fault. Um, so I, at that point, just made it a point to go through every locker room and say, hi, I'm here. Have a good show. And from there might be small talk about airport issues or whatever else might happen. When we got into the studio work, uh, there was just general chatter. I mean, your colleagues, you're working in the same place week after week, year after year, and you just kind of get to know each other. I'd say if we look back at the early years when we were doing 3 tours, there were self-contained tours, right? So people weren't moving around. You'd see the same guys on that tour all the time. And then everybody would come together for TV every three weeks. And it was like old homecoming. Everybody's, what'd you do last week? What'd you do this year? How did that town go? So there was a lot of that kind of chatter.
Awesome. And over the years, did you prefer studio shots, photo shoot, or did you prefer ringside photography?
Yes, to all of that.
Okay.
Early on, I was assigned as the ringside shooter and then grew into studio. So I enjoyed doing both of those. I think what I enjoyed the most were not the set studio pictures with a solid colored background, but featurey studio pictures, lit pictures that showed a character a little bit more. I can think of a picture of Papa Shango, red light, he's holding a smoke canister. That was a nice picture. Things like that, things where I could be creative beyond just the basic lighting package.
And in your opinion, it might be impossible to have the perfect photo, but what kind of walk us through what went into kind of, getting the perfect photo in your eyes? What did you want to see?
So it had to be well lit, right? And it had to be in focus and it had to be reasonably well composed. So those are the non-negotiables for any photo, any place. That's what you need. But then it also had to tell a story or develop a character. And that was especially important at World Wrestling. Being a news photographer, I was accustomed to going out in the field, seeing something happen, getting pictures that would then tell the story on the front page of the newspaper. So you could be looking through the paper and bang, that's the story, and you got it. So that's the skill that I brought to World Wrestling, the ability to tell a story quickly and easily.
And once you took these photos, did you know in advance if it was going to appear on a newspaper or on a magazine? Did they tell you ahead of time or it just showed up?
Sometimes, if we think about how the process worked back then, we had a magazine and that was kind of the key driver of imaging. So everything was shot with that in mind. And then all the other different parts of the company took pictures from that inventory. So posters came out of that same archive, that same inventory. Licensed product drew from the same inventory. In time, we broadened that out. We do special shoots for some features or for some uses. So there may be a poster shoot where you're going into it to shoot a poster, and that becomes a poster. But those pictures go into the archive, and they may show up on product packaging or in the magazine or someplace else. So the whole idea was to create a royalty-free image archive that the company would own, that anybody within the company could draw from. That was probably the thing that made us special back in the day.
Sure. And, when it comes to magazines, obviously it's kind of a lost art now in the digital age that we live. WWE magazine, I think they stopped probably around 2015 or so. But I feel like there's a large demand from collectors for magazines. People would still be eager to get them at the newsstands. What's your take on that? Do you think that they would do well if they were out today?
I think the cost structure is hard right now.
Okay.
They're very expensive to produce and to distribute. And how do you make money at that? I think people are more accustomed to the quick on the web kind of a thing now. It's too bad because I like magazines too. Although I'll be honest, I haven't read one in I don't know how long. Same thing for newspapers. Love
Right.
newspapers. It was my career. I haven't handled a dead tree in forever long.
Right. Another mainstay in the World Wrestling Federation, Tim White, of course,
Sure.
the owner of the Friendly Tap, Andre the Giant's handler, longtime referee and agent. Personal memories of Tim over the years, and did you ever get a chance to hit the Friendly Tap? Any memories from there?
Never went up there for the Friendly Tap. I didn't like to drink, so I didn't hang out in bars. Man, I didn't hang out with talent a lot in bars and those sorts of places. Hung out with Tim some. He was a good guy to hang out with, good guy to have around. He was really low key, like he was unruffable. You couldn't piss him off. If you did, he'd shrug his shoulders and tell you he was pissed, and that was it. He was the perfect guy to have with Andre because he could kind of shut out any problems that might be approaching and did it really well. He was also a good referee. He understood storytelling and he appreciated the work of the people around him, especially the talent.
And who were some of your favorite superstars to do photo shoots with over the years?
Well, I like the guys that had pizzazz or color or character to them. So, like a Mick Foley, certainly. Always interesting, always fun. And you could explore with him. He would try different things. Randy Savage, another pizzazzy kind of a character. Randy was hard to shoot, primarily because of the glasses, but also because he was really specific about his character and a little bit touched, a little off in, I think, a good way. He was just weird, but that made it interesting and fun too, and I enjoyed hanging out with him. I think he was one of the people that really taught me about how wrestling works, how stories develop. I told a story about Toronto a couple times where I met Macho Man. Like me to share that one for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's hear it.
All right, I was a freelancer and I was sent up to Toronto. And one of the specific things I had to do during that show was pictures of Miss Elizabeth. Randy was very protective of Elizabeth. So I would shoot pictures of Elizabeth on the side of the ring during his match. And at one point, he pointed his finger at me and said, you take her picture. I go, okay, that's pretty weird, but I get it. I had a job to do. So after he went back to his match, I went back and shot Elizabeth. This time he broke away from his match, came over to the ropes and said, I told you, don't you take her picture. This Macho Man thing.
Wow.
Freaky. Like, I'm a freelancer. I don't know this stuff. I had a job to do. So I turned the camera back on Elizabeth as soon as Randy was busy. He saw me. He jumped out of the ring, chased me around the ring. I leaped over a barricade, hid behind a cop, and he was yelling at me, don't you take her picture. I told you. Like, it was freaky. I was scared. So that night, I went back to the locker room, looking carefully for him. I didn't want to get caught, right? I didn't want him to beat me up or something. Back to the hotel, same thing, looking around corners, trying to find Randy, making sure he wasn't going to attack me. Airport rental cars, every place. Finally, I get to the next town, figure I got to deal with this. So I approach him in a locker room with other people around. I say, Randy, I was the photographer in Toronto last night. Was there a problem? And he looked at me and said, photographer, Toronto. Oh, yeah, that was good. You run fast. And that's when I realized how it all worked. We played that spot a bunch of times in close proximity. We ran it for a few towns when I was around, and then it kind of disappeared. Years later, we did a kind of repeat of it. He needed something to liven up a match, and I made that suggestion, and off to the races.
Wow.
So that was my Randy thing. He was a good guy to work with in that regard. Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. I mean, having that personal experience with him is just, something that you won't forget,
No, he was the kind of character that you always had personal experiences with because he was so different and unique. I'll give you another one of them.
Sure.
We were doing a show down, or not a show, we were doing a lifestyle feature down in Tampa. So he lived in St. Pete. I was going down there with Vince Russo, who at the time was magazine editor. And we were doing a whole day with Randy, shooting him at all kinds of different locations. Randy had a brand new yellow Corvette that he was super proud of. I was driving around in a rented Toyota. So Russo was riding with Randy. I'm in my Toyota following him. Every place we went all day long, Randy was trying to kind of gun the car and do a little race in the street. But you can't do that in the street. It's kind of nuts. End of the day, we're heading back to St. Pete. It's just me and Randy. We're on this long stretch of road, double lane highway, crossing a bridge, and we start racing, like for real.
Right.
We get it up over a little over 100 miles an hour. Russo is in the car sitting next to Randy, just kind of like, no, God, please, no. And we're head to head, and finally Randy lets up, and I win with my Toyota Corcel or whatever it was. So Randy got a little spooked, probably because of Vince. Russo jumped all over me after that about how I could have killed his talent, which is kind of true, but it's, it's Randy's option if he wants to race or not. A little while later, just a few days later, I was in Edit One, our TV building. Vince McMahon was there, put his hand on my shoulder, said, I hear you had a race with Randy. And then it got back to him, and he thought it was wonderful.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us about that? There were different buildings used for different things. Obviously, you had the Titan Towers. Why don't you tell us about some of the other buildings that were and where they were located at that time?
So early on, it was 1055 Summer Street and 1100 Summer Street, just two office buildings directly across the street from each other. 1055 was the office building. As we outgrew that, a lot of functions moved over to 1100, but corporate, the main people stayed in 1055. That was kind of like the premier location. Then in 91, those two buildings got combined into Titan Tower, 1241 East Main Street in Stamford. It was a 4-story office building, pretty big and expansive with multiple levels of parking down below. It had a fitness center. It had a travel department right there. Vince McMahon's office was up on the 4th floor. He had a nice corner office. Other corner was Linda McMahon, so she had a different corner office. And then everybody else kind of filled in. So photography there, I think, was on the 2nd floor. We had a long stretch of cubicles and office space there. Then we also had a television production building. That was at 120 Hamilton Avenue in Stamford. It was about a 5-minute drive from the Titan Tower building. That's where we produced most of our television. I had a still photo studio there, and my office was there. So that was our tight little space.
Awesome. All right. So other than, when you're not on the road, when you are at the Titan Towers, what's day to day for you there, your time that you're spending there?
So first, I wasn't at Titan Tower very often because my office was in the TV building. So things I had to do there would be edit film. So when I came off a shoot, I would look at my film and make sure everything was right, the light is right. So that's a big part of it. And build travel for my next tours. I had to go over to Titan Tower pretty regularly for meetings with photo editors, with magazine staff. So there were regular scheduled meetings like any corporate building, where you sat down with all the art directors and figured out what the next project was going to be, what stories were going to be in the next magazine, all that sort of stuff. My schedule was not 9 to 5 because I was on the road so much and those days were so long. When I was back in Stamford, I kind of picked and chose my own hours as long as I was able to go to the meetings that they needed me to go to. So it was a nice kind of free-form job that gave me lots of time off to do what I wanted to do.
And what were some of the other areas in the Titan Tower for, people that have never been inside, whether, break room or whatever it may be?
So departments were split up on different floors and different parts of floors. So photography was on one side of the 2nd floor. If we go 90 degrees over, it would have been mostly magazine kind of people, and then creative services on the far end. So units that worked together a lot were clustered together and took up most of that space. Go up to the 3rd floor, 4th floor, you would have things like marketing and public relations and that sort of stuff. Up on the 4th floor, you had Vince's office, Linda's office, talent relations, those kinds of businesses. I think 3rd floor was primarily accounting, that sort of stuff. So it was a big corporation. It had all the regular departments that a big corporation has to have. A legal department down on the 1st floor with in-house counsel plus of counsel folk. We had a fitness center downstairs. That was Vince's kind of baby. It was a really, really nice fitness center. Lots of weights, free weights, machines, all that sort of stuff. An aerobics room that I used as a studio occasionally. There were 2 locker rooms for men and women, and then Vince had his own private locker room down there. Up on the 2nd floor, we had a lunchroom. So they had a full lunch service there until about 95, 96, when they cut that back and just made it packaged lunches. But it was a nice place to eat. Up on the roof, there was a kind of garden space, so you could hang out up there. When talent came to town, they'd use the locker room, they'd use the restaurant upstairs, and you could find them every once in a while up on the roof sunning themselves.
So 1995, they actually filmed the open of Monday Night Raw on the roof.
Yeah.
Were you a part of that shoot?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Huge production. There's a really nice video that was released by World Wrestling, just intimate grab shots of talent interacting with office people that day that I really like looking at, because it shows how comfortable some office people were around the talent and how uncomfortable others were. Because it could be intimidating, right? You don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to treat them the wrong way. So it's an interesting video if you can ever find it, backstage at the making of the Raw intro.
And the crowd that was up there in that video, were those extras as far as family, friends, stuff like that? Or
Yeah, we may have put out a call for local folks to come. That was a David Sahadi production. David Sahadi did most of our major feature work, all of those intros, all those package pieces. He was a brilliant kind of producer. I think he went on to TNA or WCW or someplace like that. He was the kind of guy that had these brilliant ideas that were super complicated, and you could never understand what he was doing. You know, you'd be on a shoot and it would be chaotic, and if you look at that shoot, it's chaotic, it's a mess.
Yeah.
But he knew exactly what he needed. He knew all the shots and how they would fit together, and he made it work. So that was one of his big kind of shoots, one that I really liked a lot.
Now, this might have been during your freelance time, but any experience with the television show TNT?
Yeah, covered that a couple times. In fact, it's probably the first time I met Vince McMahon. Was it was a pretend talk show. So it was a work of a talk show. It was shot down in Owings Mills in a studio called Video One, which handled all of Titan's television before we developed the TV building. So for TNT, we'd shoot 3 weeks in a row, all at the same time. So all the talent would come in for that. And then as the show is over, they'd be sent out to all the different house shows they were going to, maybe Philly, maybe Baltimore, wherever. So you had to shoot really quick, and they had to time the talent right, so they got on the right shuttle bus and moved over to the show for that night. So my intro to Vince, I was down there for the first time shooting TNT. I was just shooting from behind the TV cameras, shooting whatever happened on stage. I had to use the bathroom, so I found a production person and asked, like, where's the bathroom? And he pointed me into a dressing room space, and I used the bathroom in there. As I finish up, I open the door and come out. And it turns out it's Vince's dressing room, along with Lord Alfred Hayes. Oh. So I step out of Vince's private bathroom into his dressing room, and there he is. And he just gave me this intense look of, who the fuck are you?
Yeah.
And what are you doing here? So I'm sorry, ducked out, and still had a job. So I guess it wasn't that bad.
You made it through.
Made it through.
So Lord Alfred Hayes, another interesting character, former wrestler, became interviewer, commentator. Memories of Lord Alfred over the years?
I didn't know him as a wrestler at all. I'm kind of sorry I didn't. I started with the company in '87. My first office was that hot desk I mentioned back at 1055, briefly at 1100. And then I was moved over to Titan TV, to 120 Hamilton Avenue. They had an office made specially for Alfred down there. It was a first floor office with a ramp that went over a little bump, so he didn't have to climb stairs or anything. The studio was on the first floor, so it was ideal for him. And they put me in that office at one point. So I had a desk in that office, traveled all the time, came back, and there was Alfred always a fixture. So he would ask me about life on the road. I would tell him about that. He would tell me about cricket and all the stuff he liked about his kids. And about his time being stabbed by knitting needles by fans.
Oh my gosh.
He had a heck of a life, yeah. At the time, I was also a very aggressive skydiver. So he'd love to hear those stories about my skydives and my time out there doing exciting stuff.
So Alfred Hayes, when he wasn't a TV role, um, what was he doing? What was he doing backstage? Did he have other roles?
I didn't see him backstage very often.
Okay.
I saw him in his office a lot. That's usually where he was. So he did a lot of coordinating with Coliseum Home Video,
Okay.
writing scripts and that sort of stuff. The office was, in a sense, also a hot office in that we had another desk there, two desks. They were occupied by Coliseum Home Video folks. So he worked with them a lot, figuring out what they were going to do for each character, for each upcoming release.
And as we got into the, I don't know, maybe early to mid 90s, Hillbilly Jim on television or in the magazines anyway was a part of Coliseum Home Video. Was that something, was he actually a part of Coliseum Home Video at that time?
I don't know.
Okay. They kind of treated it like he was one of the, the heads of Coliseum Video.
He may have been. I never saw him back in the office. Like he didn't have office responsibilities.
Okay.
But he was an intense character who would do whatever you wanted him to do.
Yeah. And another popular show, as mid 80s into the late 80s, primetime wrestling. Where was that filmed? What studio was that in? And of course, Gorilla and Bobby in the 80s, they transitioned in 1992, I believe, into what seemed like a different studio where they had the kind of the table filled with talents,
I can't tell you the specifics of that one. Once we opened Titan Television, it should have been at that building. And I know I shot primetime a lot in that building. They may have just changed the sets up. We did it on the road a few times. That was a lot more expensive, a lot more difficult to do, but more fun. So they'd sometimes take it out on the road. For a short while, Bobby had a show called The Bobby Heenan Show. It was also shot in Stanford in that same studio. So we could reconfigure that studio in a lot of different ways. The way the building was set up was an old warehouse originally used by World Wrestling for product. We moved our product warehouse up to, I think, Trumbull, Connecticut, and then retrofitted the building for television. So there was a large studio there for television, a small studio for me, a tape library. There was a spot we called Master Control, where they dubbed tapes, duplicated tapes. Edit One was a control center where they had access to all the video sources from Edit One and could play them into any building, any part of the building they wanted to. Next to that was an audio center and a VO center. So they could shoot a show out in the arena, bring it back without any voiceover, run the tapes, and the announcers would sit in the announce booth and voice over the show. An audio guy in the middle would sync up all the audio and make it work. That way they could also take a match that was voiced over in the arena and re-VO it in the office for a different market.
Gotcha. And then some of the other programs, around that time, there was Spotlight Wrestling. I'm not sure if you recall that.
I think that was just a syndicated show, perhaps.
Okay. It didn't last very long.
No, we did a lot of those. Shotgun Saturday Night was another example like that. Yeah.
All American Wrestling is another one.
Yeah. So we did a lot of syndication back then, where we would produce a show and then send it out to the various departments or companies that wanted it. If we think about our early syndication, Wrestling Challenge and Superstars of Wrestling, they were primarily loss leaders to sell tickets to live events. So we would tape the show and it would have gaps in it that would be filled with promotions by the talent saying, when I'm in Chicago, I'm going to kick blah blah's ass or whatever it is. So at the time we had television production crews traveling all over the country in vans shooting these promos. They had set up in a hotel or backstage, and the talent would cut 10, 20, 30, 40 promos in a row for different towns in different weeks. All that would be sent back to Titan Television and packaged into the show. So you'd have a version of Superstars, and they'd tag in this 2-minute interview for Des Moines, print that tape and send it to the Des Moines station, and then tag in another one for Chicago and send that to the Chicago station. So Master Control is where all that happened. They'd have to dub tapes for every single market, and then they all got put in FedEx envelopes and sent out en masse. So that's what was happening with syndication. In time, they went to pay-per-views and network shows, USA Network, for example, where they weren't customizing for every single market. They were customizing for bigger markets.
And you mentioned the Bobby Heenan show. Now, that only lasted 4 episodes. Was there any rhyme or reason as to why?
No, I thought it was longer than that.
No.
I enjoyed that show a lot.
Yeah.
It was fun.
I feel like it was all ad lib. Those people that were on, they didn't really know what was going on. It seemed like, anyway.
Probably right. Bobby was very good at that. So they would have a plan for what they wanted to do with the show, but it wasn't written. It wasn't scripted as such. It's, this is the talent. This is what you're going to talk about. This is what we want to accomplish with this segment. And then he just run with it.
And one of my favorite characters as a kid was more of a background character. He kind of pop up from time to time. I think he debuted on the Bobby Heenan show was Jameson Winger. And he played the nerdy character.
Sure.
What are your memories of him, maybe behind the scenes, but also, him in character over the years?
Well, he was an actor, so he was just playing a character, just like he would play in any other show. For us, that's unusual, right? Playing a character and then getting out of that character. We wouldn't think of what we do as acting. Of course, it was. So Jameson came to us as an actor. He created this character, and he played it to the hilt. For the most part, when he was on stage or in the studio, he was in character, especially in that show, because it was a live audience and he didn't want to break character in front of a live audience. But we would shoot him and work with him around the building. And he was just a genuinely nice guy and a good professional actor who understood what he was doing there. He was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I liked his character too.
It was great. And the banter between he and Bobby was just priceless.
He stepped into character and he became that character, which is what Bobby Heenan did as well.
Right. And of course, he went on, years later to kind of manage the Bushwhackers at the Royal Rumble and did a couple on-air segments, but it was always fun as a kid to see Jameson involved.
Good to hear, because I liked him a lot.
Now, call time for photographers, sometimes it's different for the writers, the talent. What time did you have to be at the arenas?
It varied depending on what I was doing and what the production was about. As I said, when I was doing house shows, the call time was from 4 to 12. That was my standard call. And that was set up because I needed union labor. So I wanted a straight 8-hour labor call. Televisions were a little bit different. There, instead of putting my giant lights on the catwalk, I put them on TV trusses. So if I was doing that load, if I was loading the trusses, I would have to be there at 7 or 8 in the morning with the production crew to get the trusses loaded. I do that piece of work. There's usually a production meeting around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, that kind of time frame. And then lunch was somewhere around 2 to 3, that kind of time frame. It was an early dinner. They didn't want to load the talent up with food just before a show. Then the show would happen and we'd strike. If I had to unload the trusses, I'd be there until 1 or 2 in the morning. If I had somebody else doing that work for me, I'd try and show up around 1 o'clock, check my lights, make sure everything was right, do the production meeting if I had to do that, get into the studio, do whatever had to be done there, and then shoot the show.
Any memories of fellow photographers, Roy London or Rich Frieda?
Sure. Roy London came to us, I think, from Pro Wrestling Illustrated, perhaps.
Yeah.
He was a wrestling photographer, had that kind of experience. I'll start out actually to say that I was working for Steve Taylor. Steve became the director of the ring crews, that whole thing, wrestling operations. So we had less time for photography. So we hired Roy London as my second photographer. Roy lasted for about 5 or 6 months, not very long. He was newly married. He was supposed to be the road guy, and it just weighed on him. He was not happy being on the road. So we had to kind of make that one stop. I continued to use him as a freelancer for a few months just to kind of smooth that away. But at that point, I picked up Jim Sully as a freelancer and Rich Frieda. Jim Sully was a friend who I knew from Rome, New York. I'd used him as a staff photographer up there. So he was a natural fit. He understood news, he understood journalism, and I could teach him what we were doing in wrestling. I used Rich a little bit that first year. I think it was 92, actually 93, 94, when I started using Rich. Rich took off and became my kind of main guy. Jim Sully stayed with me until '97, and was replaced by David McLean, who was actually one of Rich's old friends.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
So Rich and David, I think, knew each other from Buffalo. Rich had been a news photographer too, so had David McLean. So they had that photojournalism kind of experience that worked really well. Neither one of them knew anything about studio photography or the kind of photography we were doing, lighting arenas, marketing photography, anything like that. So my goal when I was hiring folks like that was to hire good storytellers who were good people who I could rely on, and then give them the skills and the equipment to elevate their game and hopefully become better photographers themselves. So that worked for all of those guys. Jim Sully went on to develop his own agency that would promote news photography as a marketing thing. So he took our marketing, his news photography, combined them and built his own agency. Uh, David McLean, his goal was to be a photographer with National Geographic. So pretty lofty goal. How the heck do you do that?
Yeah.
Started as a news photographer, realized he wasn't going to get there that way. Uh, Boldly gave up his job as a news photographer, moved to Maine, figured somehow he was going to make this dream happen. We gave him a lot of experience in travel, in action, in lighting, in working with different kinds of people. He parlayed that into a small gig for, maybe a month or 2 months in China, shooting travel through China for a school group kind of project. It was weird. He'd shoot this project with a whole crew. School kids back in the United States would tell him what they wanted this group to do or go next. So it was interactive with schools.
Yeah.
It was an amazing experience for him. It led him into National Geographic, and he
Wow.
ultimately wound up doing cover stories for National Geographic.
That's
That
fantastic.
fantastic. Broke away from that, developed his own agency, which he runs now with a couple other people, and they're able to do their own marketing programs for products and services that they like. So he's able to really guide his own career and his own life. Rich Frieda grew from no experience there at all to now the senior chief of photography for the entire company. He runs all of their uh, hiring, firing, training, managing of photographers backstage at all of their major shows. Or how many years later that is, from 1993 on. Pretty amazing.
That's an accomplishment.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're all good people. And I think the key there is that we hired good people who knew how to tell stories. And then we were able to develop their skills and move them higher up. So
Sure.
that would be my claim to fame, is elevating those folks.
That's awesome. When it comes to promo photos, promotional photos are huge within the collectors. Now,
Sure.
obviously, when they were coming out, you were using them for press only, newspaper use and whatever it may be. Um, but so many years later, people are trying to find these things and dig them out of the trash, literally in some instances, and they've just become a great piece of uh, you know lore in the wrestling world. So, what's your take on the promotional photos and how they've become such a collectible piece?
I don't know why. I actually didn't know that was a thing at all. I had saved a bunch of them just as portfolio pieces, really, and had them and put some of them online on Facebook and just had all this interest about it. Like, gosh, we want to buy that. I had no idea that was happening at all. So I've learned a lot over the last few years about that business. If we think about early on, they were used for autographs. So talent would have a stack and they would sign them. They were sent to newspapers to be used as promotionals there. Individual market promoters would have these things and they use them to put them on the sign advertising the show or in the newspaper ad advertising the show. So that was kind of the beginning of it all. If we think about back in that era, it was very chaotic. If you look at the early pictures through about probably 89, 90, they were all over the place, all different kinds of productions to them, different sizes, different everything.
Yeah.
Around 1990, all of that kind of stabilized with a standard 8x10. So if we think about that, there was an editor named Bob Nova, who we hired in 88, I think, and he ran through 92. So he took over the photography department and really brought structure to the promo field. So when we look at the numbering system that the collectors are using now, I think that's Bob Nova who produced that.
Oh, wow. Okay. And why were there at that point, well, early on, 8x10 8.5 by 11, and only those two sizes. What was the rhyme or reason there?
I don't think there was one.
Yeah.
If we look at what was happening back then, starting in Greenwich in Holly Hill, we were there for a couple of years, and then in 1055 for a couple of years, and then over to 1100. The picture editor was a woman named Elizabeth Milne. We called her Riz. So she was trying to help Steve on the road in the studio and manage the photography department. So she was handling all of that, moving from building to building as we grew. It would naturally have been a chaotic mess. My guess is she was just using whatever vendors she could. Probably we had other people in the company taking images and having 8x10s or promo photos made, and they do whatever they could. And it was just come as come can, do what you can with this stuff. Bob Nover would have tried to stabilize the whole thing, get control over the archive, and produce a consistent kind of product that served everybody's interest. So I think that's why we saw that transition. It was finally we had 1100 Summer Street with stability, and we had a new picture editor, and he had the space and the time to really make sense out of all of that.
And what was the storage like when it came to promo photos within the office? How did they file them? How did they, how much room was designated for that area?
At 1100, I got my promos from the photography department. So they were in vertical stack folders in a pull-out file cabinet. So that's where those were coming from when we were in 1100. When we moved over to 1241, they were managed instead by the marketing department or media department. So they were up, I think, on the 4th floor. And across from most of the offices, there was a walk-in closet about the size of a bathroom, roughly, with shelves on it, very much like the shelves you have behind you.
Yes.
And the photos were stacked by talent all around the shelves. And then we had boxes down below. There was a paper hanging on the wall with handwritten notes about what we needed and what we had. So if you needed promos, you would just go up to the floor and into that closet and pick what you needed.
Right. And the numbered series that you kind of touched on there, came to be known as the P series.
Sure.
In some instances, it kind of got a little interesting where it was, a gap of 100 P numbers, or, some P numbers were used more than once, but for a different promo and that sort of thing. Any rhyme or reason behind any of that? Or is it just kind of?
I think there was a chaos at the time. When I look at all of that, there are two things that I see that are weird to me. Number one, we start P series promos in 1990.
Right.
But at the same time, we've got a parallel system without numbers. So there are a whole bunch of promos from 1990 forward without numbers. I don't know why that is. My hunch is that the P series were originally paid for by a specific department, maybe promotions or whatever. So that's the only rhyme or reason that I can think of that would give us some being numbered and some not. When I look at Bob Nover's tenure, the only place where numbers overlapped between two pictures would be when one was color and one was black and white, and it was the same image. So the numbering system was probably about the image that was being used. After Bob Nover left, it probably kind of devolved into something else and things got missed. Keep in mind that back then, the office wasn't computerized, right? Everything was handwritten and then typed out on a Selectric typewriter. So it would be easy to do two things, particularly if you've got multiple departments drawing from pictures at the same time. So I think that's what happened. I don't think there was anything intentional there. I think we were just growing so fast and the process was so complicated. It was hard to make sense out of it.
And, it seemed like the 80s promos were mostly glossy photo paper, where it was more of a card stock in the 90s. Any reasoning for that?
Probably cost.
Okay.
If we think about, so there are different ways to make promo photos, to make any kind of photo. You can print it on a printing press. And most of the color photos were printed on a printing press. If you loop them, if you put a magnifier to them, you can see the dot matrix in there. The black and whites were primarily done as photo prints. So they would project it onto a piece of photosensitive paper and process it. So you do that 25 times, 50 times, 100 times. So that's just the easy way to make a black and white picture. And it was easier, less expensive to produce the colors through a printing press. So they were often probably looking at what's the cost and how many can we get, how many do we need. Small orders, probably make them black and white, or some of those color orders would be small. I think we ordered them in blocks of 25. That's what I remember pulling out of the paper. So that would be the texture and what we were doing with them. If we get up into 1994, 95, 96, the company was in deep financial trouble. So they reined in the promo photos. They reined in every expense they possibly could. They were cutting dollars and squeezing pennies. So I think you probably would see a difference in the kinds of pictures we were producing from that point forward. And then take it a little bit further. As we got ready to go public, 99-ish, we were again focused on cost and cost allocation, so that the accountants who were looking at the company from a public standpoint would see good numbers. So there too, we really looked at controlling cost and allocating those costs. So it may have affected what was being printed.
So we talked about the Jameson Winger character. Another character around that time, the Rosati sisters, who were kind of, they were there in different areas at different times over the years, but they were the Oinkettes on the Jameson Bobby Heenan show. Any interactions with them or backstory on how they got involved?
Yeah, I think they came from Poughkeepsie, probably that era. Before we took the show on the road, our primary television venue was Poughkeepsie. We had a venue down in Allentown as well. I think the Rosatis just lived in the Wappingers Falls area outside of Poughkeepsie, someplace around there, and just became super fans. And Vince liked them. They were funny. They would do whatever you wanted them to do, and they became good characters that way. So they were just in the right place at the right time with the right character, and it worked for everybody. They were super nice. If you think about, they were always fun. They were always laughing, always having a good time on the show and off the show. So that's who they were.
Any memories of referee Joey Morella? He was, of course, part of the ring crew and became one of the prominent referees within the company.
Yeah, son of Gorilla Monsoon.
Yes.
Yeah, so he was a young guy who grew fast within the company. He learned fast. He had good lineage with Gorilla. Worked as ring crew person and as a referee, and then primarily as a referee, which is generally what would happen with those guys. They start at the very bottom, heaving the iron, building the ring, and then do extra jobs through the day. So all of our ring crew people would be jacket people or timekeepers or announcers or referees. So they'd have more tasks to do during the day. It was part of the economizing of the program. So Joey Morella started that way, grew into a really good referee who understood how to tell a story in the ring. He was a nice guy backstage, young, chewed tobacco, I think. I don't know, just think of him that way.
Yeah.
He was killed in a car crash coming back from a TV show, the TV event. It was a long run. He was probably tired and just slipped off the road, which affected the crew dramatically. It affected me in the way that I produced our team. From there on, my instruction to my crew, my photographers, was if you're tired, stop. We'll pay for a hotel. Often we would have hotels pre-booked and prepaid at the terminating point of a tour. My goal was, hey, I don't care. We'll pay for that hotel and we'll pay for a new one.
Yeah.
I don't want you running off the road.
Right. Now, when it came to studio shots, do you remember some of your very first studio shots? Any memories from that?
The very first studio shot I ever did was Vince McMahon. It would have been 1988. I had no idea what I was doing in the studio. I was supposed to assist Steve Taylor with this Vince McMahon promo shoot. But Steve got called away for whatever reason, maybe because he wanted to goof me. I don't know. But I wound up with Vince McMahon in the studio for my first studio picture. And there it is.
Oh, wow.
It was issued in 1988. It's a terrible picture. I'm not happy with that one at all. But it's my first. It was issued in 1988 and then reissued as a P series in 1990, I think it was, as P012. So it lasted for a while. Vince didn't hate it, and I kept my job.
And it's funny because, 1990 started the P series, like you said, and Vince McMahon was one of those promos. But when they that promo was already in the 80s, 1988 promo, they re-released it in 1990, but it still had the 1988 timestamp on it.
Right, because that's the date that it was copywritten.
Sure.
So that was all about legal, like when did we
Okay.
produce this thing and when did it go out? That was important to us all the time. We wanted to, all of our photos were time stamped when they went into the archive, so we knew when they were produced.
Okay.
And we would use those in legal cases, so it was important to get the date right.
That was always one of the questions of us promo collectors. Why would there be a 1988 in a 1990 setting? So that explains that.
Yeah, if you think about when a book is published, it gets a copyright, and the copyright stays the same. You may have an additional publication date, but it's still copywritten in the original date, unless it's dramatically modified and then you recopyright.
And we spoke about some of the other photographers. Was there a competitive nature between all of the photographers, or did everybody get along great and it was just easy going?
You mean like my staff guys, my freelancers, David McLean, Rich Frieda, and all of those folks?
And not just that, but either, people from magazines like Bill Apter or George Napolitano or somebody like that at ringside, was it
Mhm.
kind of a friendly atmosphere?
Okay, I'll split that one actually in half
Yeah.
and say that our freelancers all work together super well and all work for the company super well. And that was in some cases unusual in the industry. We also worked with our television crew really well. Generally, still photographers and television shooters are at each other's throats, very competitive and mean. Because we all fed the same bottom line, all of us supported each other and each other's missions. So our team was not competitive against each other. We were competitive in trying to make our business better. The second piece of that, Bill Apner, Napolitano, and all the other freelancers that didn't work for us directly, there was a lot of competition there, but it wasn't competition to make better pictures, it was competition to make pictures. So our company generally did not allow them at ringside. Vince McMahon wanted our ringside imaging and our magazines to be unique. So our pictures had better light, they had better access. You couldn't get that in Pro Wrestling Illustrated or any of the other magazines. Big part of that is that we kept them out of the show. And we didn't allow them to shoot most of our shows. So they'd have to sneak in any way they could. If I saw Bill or George or any of those folks, I would make it an effort to get the ushers to move them out. That was part of the business, part of what we had to do. And it was cat and mouse. And they were very good cats. Now it's a very good mouse, or other way around.
Right.
They were good in the industry and they knew what they were doing. And I think they did well for our company, but they did well without competing directly with our product in quality and access. Take that a little bit further, and we allowed, if you look at our shows, probably mid to late 90s, you see a lot of Japanese photographers back behind the ring. They were working for the Japanese market. Their photography wasn't to be distributed domestically. We had a marketing agreement with their magazines and with their promoters. So that's what they were there for. It's a whole different kind of a thing. There were a few shows where we did allow general media in, and Apner and Napolitano and all the other folks would be there for that. But generally, we didn't want our pictures distributed domestically. Part of that was competing with WWF Magazine. Part of that was that we didn't want an outside archive of our talent imaging available to anybody else. If a magazine or newspaper wanted a picture of our talent, we wanted them to come to us so that we could evaluate their story and pick the right picture.
Gotcha. And then you have Bob Collins, Bob Wink Collins. Memories of Bob within the company.
Oh, another guy who was unflappable. He was a marketing guy. I think he came to us from maybe Ice Capades, which was probably part of Ringling Brothers. He was a marketing genius. He just knew how to market stuff, how to make things work. He could come up with an idea and put it into practice. Demanding in that he would come at you with a project and say, I need this shot. And you'd be like, what? But you knew that he was going to make it work. There was no fluff to what he was doing. So he came up with a lot of really interesting projects. Lex Express was certainly one of his big ones. The Blimp project was kind of one of his. All kinds of stuff like that.
And you mentioned the Blimp. Let's talk about the Blimp. How did it start? How did that get involved? And kind of talk about the legacy of the Blimp.
Legacy of the Blimp. So that actually started in probably 1992. I was a skydiver and really enjoyed skydiving all over the country and the world. I wanted to jump from a blimp, but they were hard to find. You couldn't find a blimp that would let you jump from it. Eventually, I stumbled on Virgin airships. The chief pilot was interested in what I wanted to do. He got permission from the owner, Branson. What's his name? I forget his first name. Richard Branson, owner of Virgin, who liked the idea of me jumping from his blimp. So we did that. During that process, I learned to like the Virgin company, understood that they were willing to do weird things and promote in weird ways. I learned about blimps as being capable of delivering a very simple message quickly and efficiently. So if you're trying to change a logo or present a single word kind of a message or develop awareness of brand, it was a really good promotional tool. So after making that jump, I sent a video of the jump and a little bit about it to Bob Collins and said, hey, I think this might be a good match for our company. Bob liked it, liked the idea, said he didn't really have room for it right now. Let me hold on to it. And then around 95, we were changing our logo to that ridiculous cartoon logo. That's a perfect message for a blimp, right? It's product awareness, and it's a simple one-piece logo. So he leased the blimp for that. It was a 6-week lease. So we would have our banners on this blimp for 6 weeks, and it would be the World Wrestling Federation blimp. We had a 6-week window that the banners would be on it that we would be leasing. But Bob wanted to get more time out of that. So he worked something out with the Virgin Group, which they had never done before. The blimp prior to us was leased to Family Channel. So they made a deal with Family Channel where they would take the Family Channel logo off. Their banner would come off, our banner would go on for one day. And we would run the blimp in a farmer's field area, far from any metro area, so nobody could see the two blimps, the two signs at the same time. And then I shot that from a helicopter. So we were able to produce what's now the promo photo of that long before it ever happened. We were also able to produce video of our blimp soaring around the sky and develop a longer piece of promotion or marketing than just that 6 weeks. So that's an example of something that Bob Collins would come up with, like a way to make this more effective. So he took an effective program, stretched it out, made it more effective. So that was the blimp project. We ran it for 6 weeks. There was one stop on the blimp tour at the World Games of the Special Olympics. Our goal for that blimp, one of our main goals, was the opening ceremony of the Special Olympics. Linda McMahon was part of that project. And we wanted to have the blimp fly over the opening ceremonies, and that was all scheduled and done until the president decided to show up. And they used the Goodyear blimp for that because Secret Service had a contract with Goodyear. Our consolation prize was I got to jump out of our blimp into the opening of the softball game series. So I jumped into a softball game, and
Wow.
That was kind of fun. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Our final piece with the blimp was supposed to be a jump into Pittsburgh Arena. So I was supposed to jump out of the blimp and land in the arena during the on sale for maybe SummerSlam or whatever our next pay-per-view was, but that got weathered out. So that was our first blimp experience. Later on, the XFL came into play, and Bob pitched the idea to them. They took it and ran with it and got an XFL blimp. Unfortunately, they didn't put the controls into it that we had with our blimp. It didn't work out as well as they would have liked it to. XFL at the time was being laughed at by the media, by sports press, like this is going to be a disaster. Why is Vince even doing this? So we had this blimp. It was traveling around with the XFL logo on it. We were supposed to do pictures of it and video in San Francisco area. Weather was terrible. Our shoot got canceled. They decided to run the blimp anyway. So they were doing a training flight with 2 pilots, and they lost control of the blimp. The pilots had to jump out as they couldn't land it. The blimp took off on its own, flew around the San Francisco area for I don't know how long, and then ultimately crashed into a restaurant. So the picture in the news all over the world was the XFL blimp crumpled into a restaurant.
Oh my gosh.
Perfect metaphor for what we didn't want the blimp to do. So we learned from that you really got to be on top of these folks and not let them abuse your logo.
And then you transitioned over the years into the smaller blimps that you would see in the arenas with advertising, whether it be a JVC Kaboom box or, whatever type of blimp. How did those come about? And they kind of, disappeared after a while.
I think that was after my time. I left in '01, and I don't remember any of those going on.
Okay,
It's possible there was one. That would just be just a local marketing kind of a thing, I would think.
sure. And of
We were
course, you
all,
said you. Oh, go ahead.
no, I would say we were always looking for those kinds of things, odd ways to market and synergies that we could have with other companies.
And you had the opportunity to jump from the actual WWF blimp. Kind of tell us about your skydiving history and how you got involved in that, and how long you were doing that for.
Oh gosh, a long time. That all started. I really wanted to be a pilot in early years. That was my goal, but there was no way I could afford it. So when I was working as a photographer for the student newspaper at the University of Buffalo, a guy came in asking us to do a story about skydiving. So I jumped at the opportunity, literally, and wound up making skydives in 1979 with basic static line jumps. I stuck with it for a few years, actually forever almost. Ended up as an instructor in every discipline recognized by the United States Parachute Association, made more than 4,800 jumps over 25 years. Was senior parachute rigger, licensed by the FAA, ended up becoming a commercial pilot. So I have a commercial pilot's license from the FAA. Yeah, took it to extremes. So while I was working for World Wrestling, I was doing all this skydiving on the side. There were often even times in the winter, especially, when I tossed my parachute gear into the production truck. And it would ride around the country. And if I was someplace where I could jump, I just take it out of my case and go make a few jumps and then toss it back in. Did the same thing with skis and snowboards. So I had a lot of personal gear tucked away on that truck.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah, it really was. It was my goal was to work hard and play hard. That sort of approach. And for the most part, they let me do that.
Awesome. Well, we've still got some great things to touch on in part 2. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for part 1 here with Mr. Tom Buchanan. And we'll be back, so keep your eyes peeled.